The Miz is Game Jam. So, I made a game. If you're not familiar with game jams, I don't know how you ended up on this video, but if you're not familiar with the concept, essentially you have a small period of time to make a game, and I did just that. And as the title suggests, this was also the first game that I made using the Godot game engine. A little context on me, I'm a full-time developer at 343 Industries, working on Halo Infinite. I've worked with the Slipspace engine, obviously, but also I've worked with Unity and a little bit with GameMaker before, but I've never touched Godot. I've watched several of Miz's videos, I like the content, so when I saw he was doing a game jam, I was like, yeah, I want to be a part of that. The format of the game jam is he sends us an art kit, and then we use that art kit to make the game. In this case, the first thing I thought when I saw the art kit was that I wanted to make a game that was kind of like a magic shop. There's these cute little dudes in the art assets, and I could just immediately picture them like running around causing nonsense. And then I saw a bunch of different weapons and potions and such, and then I saw a bunch of different villagers that you would see in like a fantasy RPG. And the idea just built immediately in my head of have these little idiots running a shop, and the core fun of the game is the frustration of them not doing the right thing, and then the success you feel when they do complete your orders and win. It's a little bit of a big scope, especially considering I've never used the engine before. So it does seem like a little bit of a bad idea. But I'm going to go for it anyway. I don't know. Cut to voiceover. Alright, so obviously installing Godot is not very difficult. Didn't take much effort to get that working, and I immediately looked up the best tutorials and watched a couple of those. Getting the assets imported and working correctly in Godot was a little bit more of a hassle than I expected. Working with the tiling system and the sprites wasn't as intuitive as I expected it to be coming from Unity, but I managed to get it working, get a few animations set up for the basic Goobler actions and movement. And then I got ready to take on the next big step, which is to make the Gooblers actually able to move around. So the first thing I did was I applied some of the physics stuff that I learned from Heartbeast tutorials, which a big shout out to Heartbeast for helping me through a lot of this, and if you're looking to get started with Godot, would recommend his stuff. And so I just got the dude running around. It looks pretty good, and I was pretty pleased with it, so here's an example of what's going on. Let me just launch this here real fast, and you can see he moves. Awesome. Great job, dude. It looks pretty much exactly like I want it. I tried toying around with the settings a little bit, and he became a big old grandpa. Please move a little faster. And then this one looks fine. I mean, he just stood there for a long time, but whatever. It looks okay. I did a little bit more tweaking, tested it, and then I wanted to add some animation, so had to make sure he's facing the right direction, he's doing the right thing, but now you can see that when he moves, he does his little walk cycle, and dude, where are you going? Turn around, stop or something, show off the rest of the animations? Okay, he's on an adventure, I guess, but whatever, the animations work. And so now we need to create the actual shop map for the Gooblers to work in and to move around and explore. So the asset pack came with an example of an indoor, like, tavern area almost that I was looking at for reference. I also Googled Magic Store, but that didn't give me the fantasy interior design resource that I was looking for. So I ended up designing the interior of the Magic Store based on what I thought I need for the game, which I mean, duh, obviously. But I ended up adding a garden out where maybe you could collect alchemical plants, that kind of stuff for brewing potions. I added tables along which the potions would go. I added a piping system out to some water that maybe you could use to fill the potions, use somehow in brewing. I added tables in the back for enchanting, as well as a warehouse where you could go and get armor, swords, and other things that the customers might order. I mean, I thought maybe the enchanting could tie into the warehouse. I added a kitchen for the Gooblers to go and relax, or maybe just goof off in. And a lot of this stuff ends up getting cut because obviously the scope is huge. And I don't know how I completely overlooked how way out of scope I was going when I was designing this magic shop. But I'm still happy with it because it makes it feel very full and full of life, and makes it feel more like a real shop, even though some of the stuff isn't used, because at least the Gooblers still path there in the end. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, and I'm spoiling it, and I'm going to spoil something else for you too. The next part of the video where I add the collision and I add the pathfinding, the first part of this, the stuff that I add gets completely removed or is completely useless by the end of the project. But I wanted to leave it in just in case someone here is new to Godot and wants to see the kind of things I did and the approaches I took, so they know what dumb shit not to do, because I did a lot of dumb shit. But anyway, rambling too long, let's cut back to the voiceover. So as you can see, I'm painstakingly overlaying the collision mesh onto the different obstacles so that you wouldn't be able to path around the walls or the tables or anything like that. The issue with this is, well, it works right now because I'm using move and slide and using physics to move the Gooblers. But as time goes on, I use positional updates to move the Gooblers rather than physics because I was having problems trying to update them using physics. And the collision doesn't work if I'm just updating the position. It won't stop them from moving. And here you can see, since I'm just running an example, they can't pass through the walls, they can't pass through the tables, and everything's working out just fine, even though we will literally never use this collision since everything changes to positional updating by the end of the project. But now we can move on to pathfinding. And whoo boy, was pathfinding a nightmare. So I initially tried to set it up using Pathfinder 2D nodes, and I just couldn't get them to work. I tried a million different things. Not only was I using invisible nodes, one passable and one impassable for the obstacles, which has a million different bugs that could be introduced, but also I just couldn't get it to generate the path correctly. I even added like a little line and then plotted the line from the Goobler to where they wanted to go, and at first that was wrong, but even once I got that to line up with a path that should make sense, it still didn't work. So I completely abandoned Pathfinder 2D nodes once I realized that they were going to be a huge time sink and I was wasting valuable time that I needed to do other stuff, and I came up with my own solution. And my own solution is pathfinding nodes, where each node is basically just a positional store, and you can see the little crosses on the map. Those are all the different pathfinding nodes, and they have a list of all their neighbors. So from any node, it knows how to get to any node next to it. And because of this, if you have a node and you have its neighbors, you can just simply search through the list. Basically, it's a graph at this point. You can search through to find the node you're trying to get to. And I originally had perfect pathfinding where it would find the shortest possible path, the shortest nodes that you had to travel through. But as I playtested with doing a depth first with random node lookup, it actually felt a lot better because it was giving me some of that like Goobler messing around behavior. And so here you can see, here's an example of he starts out in the middle and I tell him to go down into the warehouse at one of those nodes, and he finds a path. And you'll notice it's not perfect because he's doing random lookup into the graph, right? Where he's not guaranteed to get the shortest path, but he is guaranteed to get there. And this also gives us a great opportunity to give the different Gooblers different intelligence, where some of them generate more paths before picking the best one, which essentially gives the effect of them being able to pathfind better than the other Gooblers in the shop. And I really like that, and that stuck all the way to the end, and I still 100% think it's hilarious, even though a lot of people complained about the dumb pathfinding. I stand by it. I regret nothing. I will say that it was time-consuming and error-prone to have to manually go and add all the neighbors to all the nodes like that, but I'm way past Pathfinder, and we've been looking at a time-lapse of me adding the UI for a while now. There isn't too much to say about it. I basically just added the Goobler screen with all of the options they can take, and then a panel on the side for viewing the customers, viewing what items they want ordered, a picture of them, their name, and their frustration level. It's just all the information you need. I also added little pictures with the names of the different Gooblers. I'll expand on this UI later, but I just wanted something in place so that I could interact. And speaking of interaction, we will now get into adding the interactables in the shop and being able to deliver those orders to the customers. So basically the first thing I do here is set up some mock customers. I fill their information into the bar on the right, well, some of it, the stuff that's hooked up, and then make it so that we have a definition of what a customer is, and then I create them manually on ready rather than having them generate through some kind of means that actually will be used later to create the customer. I do this so that I can make sure the interacts are working and I can set the customers to want something specifically. So what I do is I have a topaz, and later I add the ruby and the sapphire for testing, and then I set the customers to want those items, and then I create a menu for the topaz, the sapphire, and the ruby, and hook those up so that they have the pathfinding node they need to go to, and when you click on that option, it tells the Goobler to go and run the action of creating that. And then deliver order just looks through the list of customers, which right now is completely mocked, to figure out who it needs to deliver to, and it just goes in order. And then this all worked. You could easily interact with the objects and go and deliver the orders, which meant the next thing I needed to do was set up the customer spawner. And this was definitely the most difficult part of the project because the customer spawner logic got a little bit complicated. Now, the main reason this customer order manager code that I'm writing got so complicated is because my architecture for it is just the dumbest shit I've ever made. I have no idea what came over me. Maybe I was confused by the control nodes, or maybe I was tired, or maybe I'm just kind of stupid. But for some reason, I accidentally merged the customer manager logic and the customer UI logic into the same script, which shouldn't do. There definitely should be a UI handler script that the customer manager calls into for the UI updates. And honestly, there probably even should have been a sprite manager for handling the positions at the desk, because those were all three separate things that got handled in the same logic. There was an array I had of the customers currently waiting at the desk, and then a desk assignment array, and then there was the UI assignment for each of the customers, and those were all mapped based on the customer ID that got generated. Anyway, it was really stupid, but it worked. And essentially what's going on here is we have a customer manager, and it has a list of all the customers, and when they come in, they get assigned to the first available spot. If there's not an available spot, they get assigned to one of the waiting spots, and if there aren't any waiting spots, they just immediately leave. And that works out just fine. And here you can see an example of it playing out. So the customers get generated. There's just a timer, and the timer has the constants defined at the top so they can be edited. And whenever that timer fires, it generates a new customer. It gives that customer 1 to 3 random items that it wants ordered, gives the customer a name, and then they path into the shop, and they get assigned a node to wait at based on whether they should be waiting at the desk or if they should be waiting off to the side. And then once you talk to them, it reveals their name and their order, and that all works great. The architecture for this is really bad. And if you take a look at the source code that's available, you'll be able to look at the customer UI script and be like, what the hell was he thinking? And I couldn't tell you. I mean, if you look at, this was like 5 p.m., so I don't even have the tired excuse I thought I had. But in any case, now that the customer manager is all hooked up and ready to go, instead of using the mocked customers that I was using before, now we just have the customers that get spawned here are actually the list that was getting interacted with. So we have the core gameplay loop finished. Customers spawn, come in with an order, and you can actually fulfill that order by managing your Gooblers. Right now there's just the one Goobler, so I don't have the switching, and there's only 3 interactables, but that means all that comes next is I need to add more interactables. And so that's what we're about to get into. One final note before we get to the rest of the interactables is that if I were to continue working on this project, I think the very first thing I would do would be to completely refactor this current customer manager system, because it's totally untenable. The fact that it's not just a hotbed of bugs is a miracle in and of itself. But anyway, one of the core facets of this game jam is creative use of art assets. It's one of the things you'll be graded on of 3. And so right now, nothing is super creative about what I'm doing. So for the interactables, I wanted to do something creative. So you can see I took some of the sprites from the sprite sheet and touched them up. I added, like, for example, the Elixir of Wisdom, I took the campfire, turned it purple, and put it around the edges to give it almost like this like glowy effect. And I took the plus sign and added it onto one of the potion bottles to make the healing potion. Those kind of little details to try to make it a little bit more creative. And on top of that, I also needed to add more Gooblers, because there are only 3 that come in the sprite sheet. And so I wanted to do some creativity there too. So I took the Gooblers, each of the 3, and then I modified them with a new color, and then I took the plants and used those plants to create the ears. So, for example, the same plant that I use as the Dragon's Bane is what makes Insandio's horns, or not her horns, it makes Insandio's ears. But not only did I need to make some new Gooblers, I also needed to implement the ability to switch between which Goobler you were controlling. This was relatively trivial. The way it was working right now was the Goobler that was getting the instructions from the UI was in the Goobler manager. The UI sends a signal up to the Goobler manager and says, hey, run this. And it was just using an arbitrary Goobler. So then I just added simply, if you press the number key, it switches the current Goobler to that Goobler, and then it runs all of the commands against that one. So pretty straightforward. Another small thing to touch on is adding reputation as the loss condition. I just added a bar along the top that tracks what your shop's current reputation is, and if it's 0, it triggers the game over screen. To lose points, you need to lose patience, so I also needed to add customer patience. And along the way, I cleaned up the customer UI a little bit to show the sprite and the name and show the stuff and just look nice and clean. And so it got all hooked in to where if the customer loses their patience, you lose reputation. If your reputation goes to 0, game over. And now we need to add a few other cleanup things. Basically, just a bunch of polish, adding music, adding different customers, and also adding Goobler info, which is the item they're holding as well as what they're currently doing. Now, when I was adding this, I made it so that, okay, if you're currently on your way to do something, it says that. And if you're in the middle of a task, it says that as well. So it'll say, like, oh, I'm brewing an elixir of wisdom. And I needed to put in some placeholder text. And I just arbitrarily wrote, thinking about tacos. And it was very funny to me that when they finished their work or finished delivering or whatever, it said they were thinking about tacos. So I built an entire random thought generator for the Gooblers so that whenever they're not working or whenever they're goofing off, it gives them some kind of random thought. And it really just brought them to life. It really gave those Gooblers a lot of personality. And I think I would really expand on that personality if I were to continue. Maybe give a different random thought generator to each of the Gooblers so that they have their own independent personality. But anyway, it's my favorite feature. I really love it. And right about here is where I start to really feel like I'm running out of time. So I continue my polish work because I want the UI to look a lot better because right now it looks super ugly. So I clean up the UI to where I'm happy with it. I'm not the best UI UX person, but I'm reasonably happy with the end result, although I forgot to update the topaz sprite, so it's yellow on yellow and totally invisible. But the colors I pulled from some color palette picker, and I grabbed some fonts, and I cleaned up the main menu and the game over screen so that everything looks really nice and everything looks really presentable for going up on the Jam page as my submission. And then, in what is a case of me not prioritizing correctly, I added a sprite bouncer on the customer so that as they entered the shop, they bounce. And this was not what I should have been doing. I should not have spent 40 minutes making this when I was already running out of time. But look at the preview of this. Look at those little guys bouncing. Look at them bouncing. This was completely worth it. I would not change a single thing. I'm so glad I did this. Their bounce is so cute, and I love it. But now, I need to actually focus on what's important and make a tutorial, because this game is super inaccessible if the tutorial doesn't look really good. And I wasn't sure how to approach it, but what I ended up with works pretty well, because everything is handled mostly in the Goobler Manager. So basically, I just added an override where instead of the Goobler Manager actually reacting to things the way they're supposed to, the tutorial just completely overrides it and says, hey, I'm in control now. And the tutorial prompts that pop up each have their own button that you can press to go to the next one, and they have actions that you need to trigger to tell the tutorial to go to the next stage. And then I wrote up all the different text for the different tutorials and made sure that it wasn't too long, but it gave you all the information you needed and it wasn't overwhelming. And I also decided at this point that you'd start with 3 Gooblers and the other 3 would slowly come as you continued playing. And so this was basically all the features I wanted, other than the fact that the difficulty was absurd right from the start, and I also didn't want it to be easy. So I needed to add ramping difficulty. And ramping difficulty wasn't tough to add. It only took me 15-20 minutes. Testing it took a little bit longer, but it was a pretty fast feature. And it just essentially, there are several categories of difficulty, and those can randomly increase, which is the customer spawn rate, the reputation loss rate, the patience loss rate. And so every couple, I think it's every 30 to 45 seconds, one of those difficulties will randomly increase. And then all that was left to do was for me to clean up the UI. And then I had a little bit of time left over, and I realized there wasn't any super strong justification for continuing to play. There wasn't any sense of reward, so eventually it got really stale. So I just added the ability to see the gold you earned, where completing orders earns you gold. And so that displays in the top left. So that's that. That's the end of the project. The game came together really nicely, I think. I'm really happy with the way it turned out, and I've been seeing some of the feedback. A lot of people really like the game. Some people really hate the odd pathfinding, and it sucks that that was what I ended up needing to do to get the kind of goofing off mechanics that I wanted, rather than having dedicated goofing off mechanics. But I'm still really happy with the overall feedback and the positive tone. It does suck that the game's resolution is way smaller than I thought it was going to be. I kind of messed that up, which makes it really inaccessible since it's so small, and I don't have a way to increase the size of it. So that is one huge mistake where the rest of the game works perfectly, but that one thing makes it way worse. But that's just a problem with me not being familiar with the project settings in Godot. And speaking of Godot, overall, I really love the game engine. I think it's probably better than even Unity. And I was a really big fan of Unity. When I heard other people switching from Unity to Godot, I just kind of scoffed and rolled my eyes. But I'm glad I gave it a chance because it's really good. It's really powerful. It almost forces you to have good code architecture. It's I had a node for the customer manager and a control node for the UI. So it basically was forcing me to set up my scripts correctly. I didn't listen and mess it up because I was a little confused at the time, I guess, but it really forces good architecture. It's really powerful. GDScript is nice and easy to use. It's very forgiving. And yeah, overall, I really like it. I hate control nodes. As I use them more, I got more familiar with them. But from the outset, the control nodes were really hard to use. And I did never get the Pathfinder 2D nodes to work correctly, but I think those were more my inexperience with Godot. And I think the more I use the control nodes and the more I use the pathfinding, the better it'll be. So I have nothing but praise for Godot. And also, really huge shout out to Heartbeast, because his tutorials were absolutely critical for my success in this project. And also a huge shout out to Insandio for playing it on stream, and for her whole community for playing, testing the game, and helping me find bugs. I know Insandio found a few bugs, MK found some bugs, Rave helped a lot with editing this video as well, so big shout out to my peeps over in the Insandio community. This is my first indie devlog that I've ever posted, so if you watched it to the end, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm hoping to be able to release more content like this. And I'm going to try to continue improving, releasing better stuff, maybe not make, 15-minute long monologues where I very dryly discuss all the details of my game. But hey, we'll see how it goes. So like, comment, and subscribe. Really appreciate it. And also, go play the game. If you haven't played it yet, it's amazing. It's the best game you've ever seen. Pause right now and go play the game. I'll have the link in the description, and let me know what you think of it. It's the greatest game ever made, no doubt. I truly believe that, and I'm not being sarcastic at all. I'm kind of just rambling at the end of this video because I want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything, but honestly, I should probably just stop talking, maybe just an abrupt